Okay, so imagine this, an African nation, right? But it speaks Spanish. It's this incredible bridge connecting Africa, the Iberian Peninsula, even Latin America, a place full of, well, contradictions, ancient ways meeting this, really modern, sometimes pretty harsh oil economy. Today, we're doing a deep dive into Equatorial Guinea. We want to peel back the layers, look at its journey, from colonial times to being oil-rich today, and uncover the challenges, the surprising bits, everything that shaped it.
And to help us navigate this, we've got quite a few sources. One key one is A Brief History of Equatorial Guinea by Dr. Afisava Chayapolfat Sirivadhanawara. But this isn't just about listing facts, right? It's about understanding how its geography, its unique location, and all these outside forces have really shaped its path, often quite dramatically.
Absolutely. So with that history in mind, let's zoom in on the land itself. Equatorial Guinea's geography is, well, it's really something. You've got the island, Bioko, volcanic. That's where the capital, Malabo, is. Although, interestingly, the government's actually been the sort of moving things over to Oyala on the mainland. And then there's the mainland part, Rio Muni, borders, Cameroon, Gabon, lots of thick forests, mountains.
Yeah, and those places weren't just scenic spots. Historically, they were vital. For, millennia, they were stopover points for fishing boats, hubs for trading gold, slaves, going way back, first millennium BC. But what's really striking is how early Europeans saw it. Some of the descriptions are pretty brutal, like calling it the worst place on earth or saying getting it was the greatest pain and regret of my life. Ooh, it really shows how Spain just wasn't that interested initially, neglected it, basically.
And the human story goes back even further, doesn't it? We're talking pygmies Oaxaca, maybe 25, 30,000 years ago. Then later, maybe 5,000 years ago, Bantu peoples arrive. The Fang, the Bubi, they become the core population today. But what's really interesting is how Bioko developed culturally, quite separate from the mainland, almost like two different tracks happening at the same time.
That's a really good point. And these pre-colonial cultures, they were complex, marked by, a lot of secrecy, apparently, and really sophisticated farming, especially with water management. It was genuinely hard for outsiders to get a real handle on their customs. Then colonization brings new groups. You get the Criollos or Blanco descendants of indigenous folks and Spanish, mestizos or mulattoes from Spanish men and Bubi women, and this group called the Mendejles, known for being amazing singers, dancers, acrobats, a unique mixed-race group. And the mainland folks, pre-colonial Rio Muni the Fang, Kua, and Dawe, sources describe them as having this peaceful, non-independent existence based on feminism. Simple farming, but rich oral traditions, even these Tarzan-like stories. It's quite a different picture than you might expect.
It really is. So, yeah, these diverse societies, and then, boom, the Europeans finally show up properly. In Spain, funny enough, was kind of late to the whole scramble for Africa thing in the 15th century. But losing to the U.S. later on, that really shifted things. Suddenly, they needed to hang on to their African colonies. But it was tough. Logistically, so tough. It's even described as a period of informal colonial administration with pirate rule.
Right.
Pirate rule. Can you imagine?
Yeah, chaotic is one word for it. And for the locals, brutal.
Yeah.
The big change came around the 1830s. Cocoa, introduced as a cash crop on Fernando Po Bioko, as we know it. And suddenly the colony was making Spain a lot of money. Really prosperous. But the cost was immense. Huge demand for labor meant, well, the sources say, a good deal of exploitation and abuse of cheap labor. Massive suffering. You see these powerful cocoa barons emerge. And all that wealth, it went straight to Spain, not the people doing the work.
Wow. So prosperity for Spain, exploitation for the Guineans. And then it gets even darker, right? This deliberate politics of divide and rule. The colonial authorities actively fanned the flames between the new local elite they favored and the indigenous Bubi. They actually criminalized Bubi traditions, even deported people to re-education camps in southeastern Bioko for resisting. That's just shocking, that level of manipulation.
And you can still see the echoes of that today. Communities being forcibly moved from oil areas, often with little warning, basically to hide the environmental damage. There's a specific example, the Belong districts. They built these new towns for them, looked great on the surface, new facilities. But crucially, the source notes the town utterly refused to accommodate a school for Belongs. Think about that deliberate refusal. It slowly chipped away at their connection to the land, their heritage, the fruits of childhood, as the source puts it. It just shows how that colonial mindset can linger, and the deep impact it has.
That is powerful, and it's heartbreaking. So while all this is happening, the pressure starts building on Spain, right? By the 1960s, you got nationalist groups inside the country pushing, plus international pressure from places like the UN. And all that leads to independence, October 12, 1968.
Exactly. And that nationalist movement, it really kicked off after World War II, a kind of universal cry of independence, as one source calls it. It went through roughly 3 important phases, different generations of leaders. At first, it was very much about social issues, things like segregation, Spanish-type slavery, rabid racism, or the color bar tells you a lot about what daily life was like under colonial rule.
So independence is demanded. It's granted. But what happens next? Because it sounds like that transition in the mid-60s was fast and maybe not smooth at all.
Yeah.
Sources say Spain tried to hand over democracy to a population that was largely illiterate, and it led to mass slaughter. Mass slaughter. I mean, that's just an incredibly bleak picture for a new nation.
It was bleak. It descended into chaos almost immediately. Francisco Macias Nguema took power, and his rule was just swift, brutal violence. The sources talk about political violence aimed at the disappearance of anyone who opposed him, mass executions, torture. It was horrific. And his rule only ended with another violent event, the coup in 1979 by Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, described as one of the most sanguinary coups d'etat in that whole wave of coups across Africa back then. The instability was baked in from the start, really.
Right. And then to jump forward just a bit, late 80s, the Zafiro oil field is discovered. And suddenly, Equatorial Guinea goes from being this, forgotten country to a major oil producer, 3rd largest in Africa. GDP shoots up. Investors pour in China, America, France. It must have seemed like everything was changing overnight.
It looked like it on the surface, but it quickly became a classic case of the resource curse. Huge oil wealth, but paradoxically, the economy actually contracted at times. Revenues fell. It made the country extraordinarily vulnerable to oil price swings. The economy stayed really narrow, just depending on oil, gas, timber. And this elitist economic and political ideology meant the wealth never really spread.
And the impact on ordinary people. What did that look like? Because resource curse sounds academic, but the reality must have been harsh. We hear about jobless growth, big layoffs, a severe lack of medical supplies, leading to preventable deaths from things like heart surgery issues. And it's always the unskilled citizens hit hardest, right?
Absolutely the hardest hit. The inequality is, well, it's extreme. You've got roughly 75% of people living on less than $10 a day, over 30% in extreme poverty, less than $2 a day. Meanwhile, the top 1% is responsible for 40% of the country's wealth. Its Gini coefficient, that measure of inequality, is 50.7. That puts it among the worst in the world. Even worse in places like the DRC or South Africa, which we often think of as having huge disparities. It's just shocking.
That is truly shocking. And it seems like this massive inequality exists alongside ongoing human rights problems under President Obiang. He's kept this grip. High levels of political repression. There were some supposed reforms in the early 90s, a multi-party system on paper, but then you consistently see reports of rigged elections. The ruling PDGE party wins every time. It feels very much like window dressing, doesn't it?
It certainly looks that way. The mid-90s saw a real peak in massive violations of human rights. We're talking deliberate killings, enforced disappearances, torture, other ill treatment, arbitrary detention, just widespread abuse. The international community, the UN, they've expressed preoccupation, though the government often pushes back, questions the UN's credibility. But look, the general view is that it's an unconcealed dictatorship. Very little respect for political rights, for basic freedoms.
Okay, so given that political climate, what about other social basics, like education? Officially, literacy rates look high, but the reality seems different. A poor education system, not enough schools, especially secondary schools, low coverage, kids not attending, fees being charged even when it's supposed to be free, and only 8 secondary schools in the whole country.
Yeah.
That automatically means inequitable access, right?
Absolutely, and healthcare mirrors that. It suffers from chronic underfunding, skills shortages, and ineffective management, all tangled up with widespread corruption. Yes, life expectancy is relatively high for the region, about 77, but overall health, it's poor. Infant mortality, maternal mortality, both high. HIV infection rate is significant, around 9%. And maybe the most telling detail I found, no doctors are reported to serve the population of about 22,000 in Annobon and Mongolia. 2 whole areas, no doctors. It just highlights the neglect.
Wow. Amidst all that, though, there's this resilience, isn't there? The cultural heritage. You hear about meaningful traditions carrying on drumming, art, stories, dances, passed down orally, keeping that connection alive. It really speaks volumes about the people's spirit.
It really does. And that richness is also in the languages. Spanish and French are official, sure, but the vast majority, the overwhelming majority, speak local vernacular languages. That multilingualism is one of its absolute richest heritages. But it's also fragile. Sources say it's unsteady and changing because of urbanization. So there's this urgent need to actually work on language preservation before they fade.
And what's so fascinating is how Equatorial Guinea uses this unique background internationally, being this link between Africa, Iberian Peninsula, and Latin America because of history, because of language.
Yeah.
They've hosted big international events in Malabo, that Hispanic and African Congress back in '84, the Africa-South America Summit in 2013. It really is a crossroads.
It is, and they've leveraged that position quite effectively. They're active in the African Union, been in the UN since '68, and significantly became a full member of the CPLP, the Community of Portuguese-Speaking Countries, in 2014. President Obiang was even elected president of the CPLP for a term in 2018. For a small nation, those are quite notable diplomatic moves, building bridges.
So looking forward then, oil dependence is still huge, but there's talk of potential, right? Untapped natural resources. And the government says it's pushing for economic diversification, focusing on things like fisheries, tourism. We see new infrastructure too, ports, highways, airports. Is this signaling a genuine attempt at change, a move towards something more sustainable, maybe more equitable?
Well, there have been some interesting strategic moves recently, things that suggest they might be trying to improve governance, transparency. They passed a law of transparency and access to information. There's talk of maybe privatizing parts of the national oil company, new anti-corruption laws. These could be seen as steps to address international criticism, to present a more honest face to the world, as one analysis put it. Whether these translate into real, tangible benefits for most people. Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah. So after this whole journey, what does it all mean for Equatorial Guinea? We've seen this incredibly complex history, this unique culture, the stark economic paradoxes, the ongoing struggles. It's a nation that just refuses easy labels.
Absolutely, and it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? You see young people embracing global culture so fast. And at the same time, there's this urgent need, the sources mentioned, to document and digitize all these minor heritages that are often overlooked. So maybe the final thought is this. What if a real focus on digital preservation combined with truly accessible education could do more? Could it safeguard that unique identity and boost social development in ways oil money just hasn't managed to do?
That's a really powerful question to end on. We hope this deep dive has given you, our listener, a richer understanding of a complex place like Equatorial Guinea, and maybe challenged some perceptions, sparked some curiosity about the wider world. Thanks for joining us.